Thank you all very much this morning. Dean Grant told me that she was going to start off the presentation here with a joke, and then she introduced me, so I don't know what that really says about what you're about to hear. But thank you so much. I do feel it's my privilege to be here, and I hope that what we're going to talk about today is something that's exciting. You'll hear a little bit about my own journey in teaching this experience. As my wife calls me, I am an entrepreneur. She calls me unemployable, which is probably a fair descriptor. But I've had the pleasure of teaching here at Georgetown as a lecturer for the last 5 years, and I've had the opportunity to really impact a number of students. And one of the most impactful things that I've done both in my career and in my time here at Georgetown is what I'll share with you today. So I want to start out with a story about a young man whose picture's up here today, Will McDonald. Now, Will McDonald is kind of your typical Georgetown student. How many students do I have here? Who got up this morning to come take it? All right, congratulations to you. So, parents, Will McDonald is your typical Hoya student. He's bright, he's ambitious, played high school football, he probably was runner-up as the prom king, I don't know, but very, aspirational young man. And Will McDonald is much like every student here in the classroom and here everywhere. Will has big dreams, and Will lives in a world that sometimes is hard to figure out. So Will basically came to me one day early in the semester and said, Eric, I would love to get into venture capital. Now, who here is familiar with venture capital? Right? Venture capital is essentially investing in the hottest startup companies around. And venture capital is a little bit like kind of being the coolest kid in town, particularly in the startup game. It's very difficult to break into. It's as if Will said to me, hey, I'd like to be I'd like to become a sports agent, right? Or, hey, I'd like to be a movie director, right? Or even worse, hell, I'd like to be an astronaut, right? That's ultimately what Will was saying. Something that's so difficult to do. I have a venture capital firm that I'm a part of. We, for one position, received over 2,000 applications for it. We had the pick of the litter. And so here's Will, an average, very nice and handsome young Georgetown student saying, I'd like to be in venture capital. And my response, not to his face, but subtly, was, good luck. Now here's the problem, right? Venture capital is a very prestigious field. It's very difficult. And so a number of my colleagues who are in the venture capital space put together a list to try and help people get a real sense of what it took to break into venture capital. And so these are the results they came up with. Number one, if you would like to be a venture capitalist, you should work for one of the top 3 most prestigious consulting firms or a top 5 investment banking for 3 to 5 years and dominate, right? Number one. Or, number 2, you can work for a trendy, fast-growing, hot startup company that is sort of in the product or business development or corporate development role for 3 to 4 years. And again, dominate it, right? Number 3, you could also get an MBA from Stanford or maybe Harvard, but probably Stanford. And then my last and most favorite here, this is a direct quote from one of the authors. Be born, really wealthy, preferably the child of a venture capitalist, and you can maximize your chances if you go to Stanford, right? This is the world we're talking about. So you can understand when a bright, ambitious young student like Will, who was not at the top of his class, he had never made the dean's list, comes to me and said, hey, I'd like to be in venture capital. I had a right to be a little bit cynical, right? Look, he didn't pass any of these ones. My advice to him was go back and get your MBA and hope to God you get into Stanford and get really rich, right? Like, what is he supposed to do? But Will surprised us all. It didn't surprise me, as you'll see. Will spent the summer as a venture capitalist at one of the top venture capital firms in New York City. He was hired over people who had MBAs from Wharton and Stanford, who were founders of company, and Will had become a venture capitalist. It's crazy to think. And I will tell you, the first moment he told me, I was a little bit like, really? Like, you're nice, Will, but it's not like you're the valedictorian. Will is an example of something that happens fundamentally different to thrive in today's economy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story take you back a little bit to how this all happened. I'll tell you how Will actually became able to take one of the most prestigious jobs in all of business, and in fact in all of the world. So about 5 years ago, I started teaching here at Georgetown, and as Dean Grant said, I started out with teaching one MBA class, and I guess I did a decent enough job. They asked me to teach another, and another, and another, and I now teach 5 classes per year, which, again, as my wife calls, it's a pretty damn active hobby. So I teach 5 classes a year. I teach about 300 students, about 100 MBA students, about 100 undergraduate students, and 100 high school students for a summer seminar. And again, this is in addition to having a regular full-time startup that I run. So this summer, on August 5th, I decided to have a momentary crisis of conscience, saying, all right, I'm teaching these 300 students per year. Am I actually making a difference? Right? Like, this is not my full-time profession. I'm not a full-time professor. I'm doing this because I want to actually transform these students' lives. So again, I teach 300 students per year. So I did a research project this summer, and I looked at every single one of my prior students. I looked on LinkedIn, I did surveys, I called them, and I wanted to understand, had they actually, after taking one of my entrepreneurship classes, again, to teach them how to be an entrepreneur, had they gone on to start something? Right? Had they gone out and taken the initiative to start a company, to start a business, a nonprofit, whatever it was, had they done it? So again, I pulled all this data together, thousands of students I looked at, what their trajectories were after taking my class, and the results were depressing. That's an understatement. On average, each year, I helped create 1.6 new entrepreneurs. Right? That's it. What impact am I having? Again, thousands of students are coming through my classroom, and at the end of the day, they're leaving hardly changed at all. I'm not moving the needle. And so I made a decision. On August 5th, 2016, I quit teaching. I walked into Jeff Reed's office, and I said, who's the head of entrepreneurship, and I said, hey, listen, this has been really interesting. I enjoy it. I love the students, but listen, I'm not making a difference, right? They're not becoming entrepreneurs. They're not thriving in today's world. What is the point of all of this? And he looked at me and he said, you can't. And I said, I know, like, I'm really important here and stuff like that. He's like, no, we don't have anyone to replace you in the fall. I was like, great, great. So I made a decision that would potentially transform my life and hopefully the lives of thousands after me. I said I would do it one more semester. One more semester. So on August 5th, 2016, I said I'm going to teach one more semester here at Georgetown. 3 days before class was about to begin, I was lamenting the fact that I had to do this same old boring-ass teach people how to start a startup company class to a bunch of undergraduates who weren't really going to appreciate it. They weren't going to go start companies. It was all their fault, right? And so my best friend, Shane Mack, was on the phone with me, and he goes, listen, like, it's super depressing talking to you. Like, get over it. And I was like, fine, okay. And he's like, listen, why don't you do something crazy? Why don't you do something that could actually move the needle? Why don't you do something that could transform the trajectories of these students? Do something different. And he added, I mean, it's not like they can fire you or anything. You already quit. I said, well, it's a very good point you had right there. So we started talking for the next hour or two about our lives, about our trajectory. Shane runs one of the hottest bot companies in San Francisco. I've had some amazing experiences. I've had amazing investors. I've been able to start venture capital firms, startup companies, the whole 9 yards. So we started talking about our early careers. What had happened to us that had transformed our trajectories? What had we done? Right? Neither of us started companies right out of college. What had we done? And as luck would have it, both of us had had something happen to us in our 20s that transformed our lives. We just didn't quite know it. Both of us had written and published books when we were in our 20s. Now, these books weren't well read. We didn't make much money from them. In fact, I'm sure the reviews on my Amazon reviews were probably pretty mediocre at best. But the book itself had an outsized influence. It changed my trajectory. I went from having kind of the traditional path to being able to launch my own company, to launch a venture capital firm, and ultimately to be asked to teach at a school that I probably couldn't have gotten into, right? I did something interesting. I created something of value. And so I talked to Shane a little bit more about it. Again, keep in mind, this is 3 days before class was to start, and I made the decision to do something different. I made the decision to try and do something probably crazy. It was crazy enough that I didn't tell anyone. In fact, I didn't even tell Dean Grant until it was almost at the end of the semester. I decided to transform my syllabus using all of the startup methodology I would teach to teach people how to create and launch a book. Walked into class on the first day. Now you can imagine being like walking to a class that's an entrepreneurship class. Professor walks in, I don't look like your normal professor, so I walk in and I say, hey, listen, here's what we're gonna do this semester. You all this semester are going to write and publish books. And they sort of looked at me like you all are looking at me like, this guy is fucking crazy, right? Like, and to their credit, they were certainly right? Like, I asked them the question, how many of you have ever written more than a 15-page paper? One student raised their hand, right? Here's this a-hole here telling you you're going to write a 200-page book. What is wrong with you, right? And they were probably right in a lot of ways. It was a little crazy. But to their credit, they didn't drop. They didn't leave the class, although I did hear afterwards in the hall in the break, most of them were trying to figure out, what is the last day before we can drop this class? So wise work right there, hedging. I like it, guys. So they decided to continue on with me for the semester. Now again, we approached this completely differently. This was an entrepreneurship class, how to launch a startup, but we simply replaced it with a book. And so we went through the process. We figured out what they wanted to do. They could write on whatever they wanted to. All they needed to do was become an expert in something and create a manuscript. So at the end of the first semester, they all had to turn in their draft manuscript. And again, remember, kids who had never written more than a 15-page paper, 1 out of 20 had written more than 15 pages. They turned in their manuscripts. The average manuscript length, 24,000 words. That's a 110-page paper, for those of you calculating at home right here, from people who had never done it. They'd all written on things that they cared about, that they were passionate about, and that they thought could transform their trajectories. That's what they did. They created something meaningful. Then I started to read them. I thought, well, maybe these are just like words on a paper, they don't matter. They were great. They were so good, in fact, that I reached out to a friend of mine who runs a publishing company. And I didn't tell him this, but I sent him the manuscripts. And I said, hey, take a look through these. Tell me what you think. He got back to me in a couple days, and he said, hey, these are actually really good. Like, these are publishable with a little bit of work. And I said, well, I got something to reveal to you. I said, these were written by sophomores, juniors, a few seniors in my class in the course of a semester. And I know this is a Jesuit institution, but he goes, no fucking way. And I was like, yeah, it's true. And so he agreed on the spot to publish them for free. A publishing company decided to publish all of these authors. So we took them to the next steps, creating covers, helping them do marketing, helping them create businesses associated with these ones. And in April of last year, they created and published their books. And again, what happened today is we took that again. We have another 20 students who are publishing this fall, many of them you see around here. That's the story of what happened. But that's not really the story behind it, right? Publishing a book is great, it's interesting. Like, I'm sure all the parents and grandparents are like, that's amazing, Georgetown did something awesome. But that's not what I did this for, right? I didn't do this because I wanted to help people publish books. I wanted to transform their trajectories. So let me take you back to this guy. This guy, Will McDonald, right? Will McDonald walked into my class in August of 2016. As you remember, a special time in my life when I was changing this class. And Will said to me, I want to be a venture capitalist. So remember all of these things that he needed to do. He needed to go do all of these things right here, right? All of these people that he needed to be associated with in order to be seen as valuable to venture capitalists, right? All of these brands. I need to have the brand of McKinsey, the brand of Bain, the brand of investment banks, trendy startups, whatever, Stanford. F Stanford, by the way. But all of these things, get an MBA, right? That's what he had to do. But what if he could do something different? What if he could create something that could actually demonstrate what he loved and that he was good at it? And so Will McDonald spent this semester with me not doing those things. He actually landed an interview, as luck would have it, at a venture capital firm. He came up to me and he said, hey, I've got this book right here. This is basically Venture Capital for Dummies, effectively, written by a friend of mine named Brad Feld. And he said, I need you to teach me everything you know about venture capital. And I said, no. We're not going to teach anything about venture capital. I want you to keep working on your book. And he said, are you serious? Like, I don't know anything. And I was like, I know. I want you to go in this interview, and I want you to know nothing about venture capitalists, nothing about venture capital at all. I want you to understand how you can create value, how you can do it. So Will continued to work on his book. And he walked in, and he showed them this. Talked about his book that he'd created. That's how Will McDonald got his job. They didn't ask him anything. Again, he got his job over MBAs from Stanford, Wharton, Harvard, people who'd been working in startups, because Will demonstrated that he actually had the effort and the hustle to create something. That's the magic here, is that Will demonstrated his purpose. And so that is how Will was able to land his job, not by doing the standard thing, not by doing those things at all. Will was able to do it because he created evidence of his passion. He created his own credibility. And this is what we've started to do routinely now. These are some examples of students who have already created or are creating currently their own books. These are people who are creating books as evidence of their own passion. They're creating evidence that creates credibility. This is part of the magic here, is that we have helped transform individuals from people who borrow signal from institutions to people who create their own credibility through what they do. And that's part of the magic. So let me take you through a little bit of like kind of why this all works a little bit. What we learned from this process is it's not only about these students, it's actually that there's an entirely new path that you can leverage for success. Right? I thought, well, okay, maybe this was just a fun experiment that I ran on a number of students. Like, they probably would hate if I told them this was a big experiment, but effectively that's what we were doing, was let's see if we can experiment and help people create their own credibility. Can we help people create their own credibility? And so I wanted to understand, was this just a one-off thing? Was this just something that I got lucky? The answer is no. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we learned from our research about the science of the new credibility. There's a huge change that's happened, and oftentimes you as parents particularly will not recognize what's going on underneath us, but there is a fundamental shift going on in how the way that we will live our lives and we will drive success in the new economy. And that's what this was, evidence of that change that most people have not yet recognized. So let me start out with a little bit of a nerddom for you here. This is a little bit of econometrics. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the concept of signaling theory. Now, signaling theory is actually the reason that Georgetown applications have gone up exponentially over the last 40 years, right? Because of signaling theory. Signaling theory is essentially a theory that talks about what can you do to increase your credibility to get what you want. It was started by a graduate student named Michael Spence, and the signaling theory, in fact, changed his lives and the lives of millions after. So essentially what Michael Spence was doing is he was researching this paper that was about how do we find lemons in used cars. So he was doing this big research to try and he was studying interested in that one. And so he asked the question, how can we apply the same thing of finding what used car is a lemon in the job market? Now, it seems sort of weird that he's basically comparing used cars to college students, but if you look at some of their dorm rooms, maybe it makes sense. They kind of have some similarities there. But essentially what Spence wanted to understand is, what could an employer do to figure out who is going to thrive and who's going to be a lemon? He wanted to understand how could we use signals that the students would throw off to understand who might be able to actually thrive. Which of these thousands and millions of graduates, 3 million graduates per year, how do you know who's going to thrive? And how do you know who's going to be a lemon? So this is the concept of signaling theory. And effectively the short version of it is, it doesn't matter what you do in college. It doesn't matter what your grades are, what your majors are. The only thing that matters is how prestigious a school you went to. That's depressing, right? The only thing that matters, the only thing that employers should look at, they shouldn't even look at your resume, just did you go to Yale? Awesome. If you didn't, you're screwed. That's basically what he said. And here's the theory behind it, what happened. Remember, Spence proposed this theory in 1973. This is a time before the internet. So part of the reason this theory was effective is because of the limitations of the human brain. Now, researchers know that humans are only able to manage about 255 relationships in their brain, right? So let me ask you a quick question. Think about this for a second. If I asked you, recommend the maximum number of good restaurants you know, start thinking. Start thinking. Most of you will probably only be able to come up with 4, 5, 6, right? That's just the limitation of the human brain. We can only do that. Now, if I give the trick a different time, pull out your phone. How many good restaurants can you find? There's this little thing called Yelp, right? Like, suddenly we have access to millions, right? But historically, we didn't. So what Spence found is that it's impossible to look at a good candidate or not. Like, I can't know whether one student is good or not because, like, they're just all the same, right? They just all look the same. But what Spence said is we can know which institutions are prestigious. So he said it's part of the reason there's this thing called the Ivy League, right? Those are schools that are designated to be prestigious. So in Spence's world, the only thing an employer should look at is how prestigious of an institution did you go to, right? That's what he looked at. And he said, listen, all of these people that are associated with these institutions, right, they're irrelevant. They're just basically pawns in the cog. So if we know that certain institutions are prestigious, certain institutions are valuable, well then automatically the people associated with them are valuable. And so focus all your energy on the valuable institutions and the people associated with it, right? It's depressing, right? Like, I didn't go to Harvard or Yale, or couldn't even get to Georgetown, right? And this is depressing. If that's the best we can do, is that you are destined for it. So if you don't get into the best schools or you don't have the best, prestigious things, you're screwed in life. This is basically the summary of what Spence's research had. And again, while it's super depressing, it's actually right. Michael Spence in 2001 was awarded a Nobel Prize. A Nobel Prize for this. And again, it's depressing, right? It's counter to everything I feel as an educator and as an entrepreneur. What is the point of me teaching if all that matters is where you went to school? And according to Spence and a lot of frickin' smart scientists, it's right. Until it's not. So I'm going to tell you what we found of something that fundamentally changed. Something fundamentally changed that we've been able to help people transform their lives simply because they now realize it, right? And while a book is part of it, we'll explain to you the bigger thing. So again, the whole thing behind this is that credibility can only be borrowed from institutions. You as an individual can't create it. So every one of the students in here, the only thing valuable to a potential employer, a potential partner, a boss, whatever it is what school you went to. That's the theory of signaling theory. That's the theory of credibility. You borrow credibility. We went out and studied the 3,400 Forbes 30 under 30. Now, you would think that 30 under 30 would mean that they would nominate 30 people per year under 30. In fact, they have 600 per year. So I'm not like a math guy, but something doesn't totally make sense. So anyway, there's about 3,400 Forbes 30 under 30 for the last 7 years. And so we went out and studied every single one of them. We wanted to understand what they did to thrive. Again, these are some of the 0.001% of the most successful young people today. We looked at them. We wanted to understand what they did. So if, again, Spence's theory is right, that would mean that the vast majority of them would have gone to the most prestigious institutions. They would have taken the most prestigious jobs. The only thing that matters is what institutions they went to. But they didn't. Less than 20% of them went to the Ivy League schools. They went to over 500 different schools among these 34. Almost 20% of them on their LinkedIn didn't even list a college they attended. 16% of them didn't even go to college, right? So this wasn't what mattered to them. Something else did. Everything that mattered to this group right here is evidence that they had created, things that they had done that showed off their credibility. It wasn't about borrowing from institutions anymore. These people didn't take prestigious jobs at Goldman Sachs, investment banks. What they had done is they had created their own credibility because something changed. Something has changed in the world that enables people now to make it, right? We're not limited by our human brain and those 255 relationships. We can now do something different. These are the people that thrive today. We found these people, and we talk about these, we talk about them in class. These are the new world of people who succeed. These are people like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is the founder of Hamilton, Chance the Rapper, who parents have no idea who I'm talking about. These are all people that we talk to, and these are people that thrive. The guy in the bottom down there, Shane Mack, the one who originally I blame for this every day of what I'm here for doing now. Shane Mack went to Western Illinois University. As he says, so you've never heard of it, because you haven't. He started out his career as a wedding singer. Now today, he's leading one of the leading bot companies. Shane Mack is an example of what we found. These are the new people who are creators of credibility. It is the new secret of success, is that people today are not based on where they went to school and what institutions they went to after their first job. That's not what matters to succeed today. What matters is that we can all create our own credibility. This is how Will McDonald thrived, right? Again, Will McDonald did not have any of the credentials that you would expect, you would want, right? Why would people hire him? He didn't do any of those things. He'd never even made the dean's list. And yet, he got the job of his dreams. A job that, again, I liken to, Jerry Maguire, right? That's because he was able to thrive as a creator in the new economy. And so what has changed today in the world that enables us to affect people's success is that today the world is driven by people that create credibility rather than borrow credibility. That's the change that happened. And the reason most of it missed it is because we didn't realize that the internet was such a powerful force. Over the last 5 years, every single one of us now has our credibility available for viewing online, right? Just like I can go out and figure out which restaurant I want to go to, I can go out and figure out every single one of you something about you. I understand you. I know you. 98% of employers now, what's the first thing they do when they look at your resume? They Google you. They want to understand who you are and what you do. And so the powerful thing here is that we've created a group of people that are bragging smartly. They're showing off who they are, they're showing off what they care about, and that's how they thrive. So again, think about what the world has changed a little bit when we started to see this. Again, historically, it was all about institutions. And again, institutions do still have credibility. So again, I'm standing here in the hallowed halls of Georgetown. I'm not necessarily saying that it doesn't matter that you don't go here, but I am saying it's not enough. I'm saying it's not enough to thrive in the new world. It's not enough. And it's going to become less and less valuable as institutions lose the power of their credibility, because individuals take that over, right? Today, the most successful people are not people who borrow signal or borrow credibility. Those are people who still are doing okay. It's people who are creating their own. And in fact, what we found is that people who create their own smarter, more differently, and better, they actually can thrive faster and quicker. All of the people on the Forbes 30 under 30, the people who are thriving the fastest, are the people who are making their own ways to success. They're able to get there faster. And so the challenge that I wanted to understand as I started this whole quest was, again, 1 in 8 of you, of all the graduates here, will find a job that you find fulfilling. 1 in 8. That is depressing and unfair to every single one of you. And the reason is because you believe that we're still living in a world of borrowed credibility. And that's not what you should be believing. You should understand that we're in a world of created credibility. So I want to share a couple quick stories of a few students that have gone through this experience. And I'm going to play a video of some of the students who have gone through this experience this semester so you can meet them. And I would love for you to basically talk to all of these students who've gone through the experience, because as students and parents, I want you to understand that you've done the first hard step, which is bringing people and getting into Georgetown, but that's not enough. It's no longer enough to thrive if you really do want to achieve your dreams. If you want to avoid being the 7 of 8 people who don't find your dream job, you have to think about the world differently. You have to create your own credibility. These are 4 students here. Again, very normal, very average. None of these people had started a company beforehand. Cody Backer is an individual who was a Marine Corps veteran and who came back to college. Jacqueline DiGregorio is an individual who basically turned down her summer job because she decided she wanted to be an entrepreneur. Shiv Jangiani was all set up to intern at KPMG next summer. And Antonia Liu is an individual right up in front of me. I think she's still here. She might have just left. Who is an individual who wants to be an entrepreneur. All of these individuals found their dream jobs, just like Will did. Found what they want to do. Excuse me, Cody is actually working as, not Lead Edge, Cody is actually working at a consulting firm, but he's created a company for veteran coaching. Jacqueline DiGregorio is actually an entrepreneur. She launched a $20,000 Kickstarter, and she is now doing exactly what she wants to do. She has 61 paid speaking gigs set up on the back of her book and her own career this semester. Shiv Jangiani turned down his internship at KPMG and spent the summer working as a soccer scout, helping people find talent in India, where he's originally from. And Antonia Liu spent the summer at one of the hottest companies in San Francisco that was not actually hiring undergraduates, called Masterclass. She was able to make her way in. Now, the magical part of this is it's not something magical, right? It's actually a process. The interesting thing here is that while most people never believed that they could wind up getting these jobs, it's a process. Again, what we have people do over the course of the semester is they just decide who they want to be. And they think, they read, they research, they interview, and they create. That's what they're doing. That's the magic here, is you're doing things that you care about, enabling yourself to create success. All of these individuals then turned that knowledge that they did about something they cared about into a book. And that book is something that they were able to use to create what they wanted to become. All of these people did something. We said that they demonstrated their purpose. Every one of you in this room knows what you want to be. You just think, well, I could never do it. I could never be an entrepreneur. I could never be someone who could be a soccer scout. I could never be someone who works at a startup. But the reality is you can. You just can't rely on getting into a good college anymore to get it. You have to create your own credibility. And so, again, the reason that we use books in this experience is twofold. Number one, it's one of those things that if you publish a book, your parents are going to think that, man, you're super smart. So that's the first thing. We think that books are a really important tool. But the second thing is this. Before we started this class, only about 30 college students per year would create and publish books. So the reality is, if you're able to walk into an interview and say, hey, listen, let me actually show you something I created, you're able to open whatever door you want. Now, again, you have to walk through that door, but the important thing is to understand that. So I think it's important to know here that what we studied all of these individuals here that had creating takes different forms. We pick books because it fits within the academic institution, but people in this Forbes 30 under 30 group are doing all sorts of things. They're creating books. They're building conferences themselves. They're publishing their research. They're doing podcasts. They're doing videos. They're designing things. They're putting on concerts. They're putting on article series and courses. They are creating evidence of their own passions. They're doing it. They're actually putting stuff out there. They're thinking differently, they're acting differently, and they're communicating differently. And that's the secret of success today. And so as each of you think about your own careers, and as you parents think about your children's careers, understand that it's not enough to essentially go to Georgetown and make your way through. You have to wind up thinking about yourself as a creator. That's the path to success. And so these are the people that we studied over and over and over again in this world who are thriving today. These are all people who did not necessarily follow the traditional path, nor did they take the risky path of saying, I'm going to start a company right out of college. None of them did this. Every single one of them created something that was theirs and that they shared with others openly in a way that demonstrated what they cared about. And now all of them are people who are thriving. The interesting thing, though, is that every one of you has the same opportunity. Every single one of you Georgetown students is aspirational, has dreams, and has goals. The reality is your goals and your career path is not your major, right? Your major, 27% of people who major in something do a job that's related to that major. 27%. So don't kid yourself that, like, hey, I picked my major, that's my career path. You're wrong, right? The reality is you have to pick your career path. All of these people had to decide who they wanted to be and then create evidence to get themselves there. So you have to be the expat. I want to have a career in expat. I want to be a venture capitalist. I want to do a Kickstarter. I want to become a scout. I want to manage up-and-coming hip-hop artists. I want to work in the beer industry. I want to become a speaker. I want to become a techie. I want to become a nomad. Those are the things you have to decide to do. You have to believe in who you are, who is your purpose, and you have to find ways to demonstrate it. I'm going to quickly tell the story of Monica. Monica is a student of mine who came into class on the first day, and she sort of didn't take me all that seriously, which isn't totally surprising. But she didn't take me all that seriously when I said, you're going to write a book. And she turned to me and she goes, like a book? And I was like, yeah, like a book. She's like a book on anything? I was like, yeah, like a book on anything. Like, you can write on whatever you want, I don't care. And she's like anything, anything? And I was like, I don't know what to say anymore here. Like, yes, anything, anything. She's like, well, I really like beer. I was like, great, write a book on beer. She's like, are you just saying that? Like, am I going to fail this class? I was like, no, write a book on whatever you care about. Write a book on beer, for God's sakes. I don't care, right? Write a book on something you believe in, you care about. And so Monica wrote an amazing book called Graduate Your Beer Craft, a poor college kid's guide to craft beer. Her learning is that as she was going out and working early in her career, she would go out for drinks at work. She didn't like wine, but she didn't feel good ordering like a Bud Light or a Natty Light or something like that. She's like, I look like an amateur. And I was like, yeah, you probably do. So she basically wrote a book on how to understand and order craft beer to look like a professional. That was her book, and it was wonderful. The day before graduation, Monica sent me a note. And she said, listen, Professor Koester, I'm graduating tomorrow, and I don't have a job. And I was like, I know, gosh, that's terrible. Like, what are you trying to do? She's like, well, I've been interviewing, I've been trying to do this stuff, but I don't have a job. And I was like, where are you applying at? Where are you interviewing at? She's like, well, like, you know, kind of like marketing companies and sports companies and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, didn't you just write a book on beer? She's like, yeah, I wrote a book on beer. It was awesome. It was like one of my most amazing classes. And I was like, yeah, you wrote a book on beer, right? Anything missing in that list of places you're applying? She's like, I don't know. What are you talking about? How about you reach out to a few beer companies or a few companies in the alcohol space or whatever it is? You love that. She's like, are you just saying that? Like, you can't really mean that. I was like, yeah, I really mean it. I really mean it. Reach out to companies of something you love, right? It doesn't have to be the traditional thing. Like, it doesn't have to be that. Pick something you love. I said, okay, I guess I can do that. So she sent a few emails out to people, a few companies. The next week, she texted me, 6 interviews lined up. What? She's like, I couldn't get an interview for her to save my life, and now suddenly she had it. She says, listen, I've got a really exciting interview lined up from 2 weeks from now. I'll let you know how it goes. It's the leading beer distributor on the entire East Coast. She said, basically, he's going to meet me at Union Station, and we're going to have an interview, and hopefully it'll lead to the next interview and stuff like that. So she went to Union Station to meet him at 11 a.m. for her scheduled interview time, and he texted her about 5 minutes beforehand, like, hey, I'm running late. Can we do noon? He's like, sure, I can do noon. She had a 2 o'clock train, and she's fine. She'll make her train backward to where she needs to go. So at about, 11:55, gets another text. Yeah, can we do 12:30? Like, sure, fine, 12:30. Fine, great. 1 o'clock. Hey, sorry I was late. How about we do 1:15? She's like, listen, I have a train to catch at 2. He's like, I'll make it. 1:25, he texts her, and he says, all right, I'm in the Starbucks. Where are you? She's like, I'm in the Starbucks. They realize they're in different Starbucks. She runs across the entire Union Station. She finally gets to this place. She walks in. She's sweaty. A bird had pooped on her that day. It's a terrible day for her, right? She walks in. Again, right now, think of it. It's 1:35. She walks in, a sweaty mess, and she sits down. And he's like, so, I heard you wrote a book. She's like, yeah. She pulled out of her bag, like a book, never asked for a resume, had never even seen her resume. Said, yeah, cool, let me see it. Gave it to her. He's like, it's yours, it's yours. He's like, would you sign it for me? Again, her future boss. Would you sign it for me? She's like, sure. Asked her a whole bunch of questions about it, kept going on and on. And basically at this point, it's about 1:45 or so. She's like, hey, listen, can we talk about like when my next interview will be? I'll come in or whatever it is. Like, I got to catch my train. He's like, oh, there's no next interview. I'm going to make you an offer right now. He walked outside, confirmed an offer, came back. At 1:50, gave her an offer. She ran to her train, and she now works in the marketing department of that company. That is the power of creating your own credibility. That is the power of pursuing what you love. All of us have it in us. We just don't realize that it's not enough for us to rely on the old ways to do it. Every one of us, bird shit and all on us, can wind up having whatever we want to do if we wind up creating our own credibility. And that's the magic of what creators do. The magic here is that every one of us can have the creator's mindset. And the interesting thing is when we research these people, we studied thousands of people that have this path, that follow this path, which is not the traditional one. It's not following a traditional path. It's not taking the entrepreneurial path per se, but it's basically owning your own trajectory, being your own person who navigates through a career. We call this the creator's mindset. We study these people over decades. These are the people that are the happiest, they're the wealthiest, they're the people who are the most marketable. Right? It's not a risk to do these things. It's just the way to succeed today, is you have to wind up having the creator's mindset. Again, we do it in a simple way. we make people authors. We give them evidence of things they've created that they care about, that they can show off. They can use these things to open whatever doors they want. And that's the power of credibility in the new world. Today, it's not enough to borrow credibility. Success comes from creating it. And so again, there is a new path today. There really is. And again, I didn't quite know what it looked like until I walked nearly 100 people through it. Every one of us wants this, right? 70% of millennials today want to work for themselves one day. They don't actually want to work for themselves, is the interesting thing. They just want to have autonomy and control over the future of their lives. These are all people who want to be creators. They just don't know that they can. And that's the most powerful thing about all of this. Every single one of us can be a creator. Every single one. All you have to do is decide what you want to do and then figure out ways to demonstrate daily things that help you think, act, and communicate differently.